The older I get, the more I really miss Saturday morning cartoons. Now, Zach, you're considerably younger than I am. So when you think of Saturday morning cartoons, you think of something different than I do. I think of Looney Tunes. And, the whole Saturday morning was filled with them. But one of the ones that came to mind this week, thanks to a cousin of mine, goes along really well with Labor Day weekend. It was the ongoing saga, the ongoing story of Sam and Ralph. Sam was a sheepdog. And he looked kind of oafy, didn't look real bright. He had long hair in front of his eyes, exaggerated for effect so that it looked like you couldn't really see anything. And then there was Ralph. Ralph was the wolf or the coyote. He actually looked almost identical to Wile E. Coyote, but I think he was supposed to be a wolf, not a coyote. So anyway, Ralph is kind of the opposite in appearance from Sam. He looks like he's slick, might be a little intelligent, and certainly slippery and lithe. He can move around real easily. But what you see is every morning, the two of them would end up meeting somewhere on the road, and they'd go to work together, and they'd come to a tree where there was a time clock. And they would take out their punch cards, and they would punch their time card and put it in, and then they could start their day. And the day was filled with, of course, Sam protecting the sheep and Ralph trying to steal the sheep. It was always kind of fun, because what you found out very quickly is Ralph was no slouch, or Sam was no slouch. Sam always got the better of Ralph. But what was always funny was, at the end of the day, when the whistle blew, didn't matter what they were doing, they stopped dead in their tracks. So, in one scene, for instance, Sam's got Ralph by the throat and he's getting ready to punch him. And they say, we'll pick up with this where we left off tomorrow. And they stop everything. They walk back to the clock. They punch out. And then they walk home, often arm in arm. And what it is it's sort of an homage or a wink toward the labor movement. The Looney Tunes were largely created during the times when the unions were really coming into their own. So it was a celebration, or at least a comical look at what it meant to work those 9-to-5 jobs where you clock in, clock out, clock in, clock out. And it just became fun to watch. But I think it points to a little bit of what Labor Day is about. Labor Day is a celebration, first of all, of those who labor, those who do the heavy lifting in our society. But more than that, it's supposed to remind us and cause us to think positively about the advances we made in relationship to how laborers are treated. The advances in collective bargaining and unions and so forth. Whatever you may think about unions, that's what Labor Day is about. And so it's supposed to be a time for us to sit back and say, hey, look at how far we've come, and also look at the contribution that laborers made, whether skilled or unskilled. We live in Pittsburgh, which even today I believe is still the city with the most bridges in it, in the whole world. It's not. What is superseded? Louisiana has more bridges. You're kidding. All right, I stand corrected. Nonetheless, you look at those marvelous constructions and you just stand in awe. Those things support tons upon tons upon tons every hour. And it's because of the work of laborers. Look at the skyscrapers in any city. Look at the infrastructure of any town or borough or city or otherwise. Running water, sewage system, the drainage systems, electricity, all of those, we have labor to thank for. And so Labor Day is about focusing on the value of those who do the heavy lifting in society and the work that we've done to try to improve how we treat them. But as I thought about how that might fit in with the church, it occurred to me that maybe there's a different viewpoint or a different way to look at the question of labor. Maybe instead of celebrating labor, we ought to celebrate rest. We ought to celebrate the Sabbath. Let me read to you the institution of the Sabbath. Actually, I think the institution goes back farther than this, and maybe I'll mention that in a minute. But these are from the Ten Commandments, first in Exodus, and then Exodus, of course, is where God gives us the Ten Commandments on Mount Sinai. And Deuteronomy is Moses sort of recapping what God's commandments are before he goes off to die. So in Exodus it says, "Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. But the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord your God. In it you shall do no work, you, nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your male servant, nor your female servant, nor your cattle, nor your stranger who is within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that is in them, and rested the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it." And in Deuteronomy it reads this way, "Observe the Sabbath day to keep it holy, as the Lord your God commanded you. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. But the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord your God. In it you shall do no work, you, nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your male servant, nor your female servant, nor your ox, nor your donkey, nor any of your cattle, nor your stranger who is within your gates, that your male servant and your female servant may rest as well as you. And remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and the Lord your God brought you out from there by a mighty hand and by an outstretched arm. Therefore the Lord your God commanded you to keep the Sabbath day." Obviously, slightly different. One justifies observing the Sabbath based on creation, the other based on the Exodus. Taken together, though, I think they provide for us a pretty solid picture. Let's start off with what does Sabbath mean? The word Sabbath simply means to cease or to stop. So the whole idea of Sabbath is stop! Stop what? Stop your laboring. Well, wait a minute, it's Labor Day weekend. We're supposed to celebrate laboring. True. But have you ever considered this? Laboring, biblically speaking, is a curse. Laboring is a curse. We didn't have to work when we were in the garden. God did not create us to work. He created us to be in perfect fellowship with God so that God could be our provider. It is our rebellious desire to go it alone that forces us out of that intimacy with the Father and into the world where we have to make our way by the sweat of our brow. It's a curse. And yet God comes onto the scene and gives us a gift from the very beginning, the gift of Sabbath. A gift he models himself for us. He worked 6 days according to Genesis 1. Put it all together, all the things that we know as the universe, put it all together. And then on the seventh day, he rested from his labors. He stopped. Now, in one sense, that reads very simply like this. If it was good enough for God, it's good enough for you. But I think we can go farther than that. Because it's not just about making an example, it's about being a model. What does it actually say God did? It says he stopped, and then he rested within his creation. Sabbath means to stop. The other word that's used in the Exodus version of our command to observe the Sabbath is a word that means sort of like to settle down or to almost to dwell, but not quite. And so what we have is this picture of God stopping what he was doing and just sitting down and hanging out in his creation, just fellowshipping. If that's a model for us, then what we find is that Sabbath is about not just being a day off, which is how most of us treat it, but it's about a day off with a purpose, a day off for something valuable, and that is to fellowship with, to commune with God. It's a way of temporarily restoring what we lost due to sin. It's about coming into the presence of God and saying, you know what? I really should be able to depend on you, God, altogether. And so for one day anyway, I'm going to stop. And I'm going to spend my time communing with you in your presence. That's a whole different picture, isn't it? By the way, the Sabbath has not changed in terms of date or day of the week. Sabbath is the seventh day of the week. That's Saturday. Jewish people observe days as starting from sundown the previous day. We usually figure it from midnight, but it is traditionally from sundown Friday to sundown Saturday. That is the Sabbath. It continues to be the Sabbath. It has not changed. Christians worship on Sunday not because it's a new Sabbath, but because it's the day of resurrection. It's the day Jesus rose from the dead. He's the firstborn from the dead. It reminds us that we're looking forward to resurrection also. It's the first day of new creation. It's the 8th day of the first creation. It is the thing that moves us into the future and gives us hope. Every Sunday is a little Easter, some people like to say. But the Sabbath continues to be the 7th day. That may or may not be important. I just want to make sure we're clear on that. But let's move forward a little bit. What else is the Sabbath about? Did you notice who is supposed to observe a Sabbath? All. Everybody. Not only the head of the family, but the children, the servants or slaves, even the beasts of burden. Why? Well, Deuteronomy says it's because we're supposed to see in the Sabbath a reminder of the Exodus, the freeing of Israel from slavery in Egypt. One scene in that story stands out, and that is the one where Moses goes to Pharaoh and he says, hey, give us 3 days to go into the wilderness and worship our God. And Pharaoh says, absolutely not. These people are slaves. The people of Israel are slaves. They don't get time off. They're there to be exploited. That's what slavery is about, is exploiting a force for labor. It's treating people as machines. And in fact, just to prove his point, he adds to the quota. He adds to what's required of the people. These aren't people of value. They're slaves. But the Sabbath says, there's nobody who is worthless. Nobody. It says you're to treat even the slave like yourself. Even the slave. So, buried in the concept of Sabbath, or maybe not all that buried in the concept of Sabbath, is the reality that your value is not based on what you do. How do we greet each other and introduce ourselves in society today? One of the most common and fundamental things we do is we talk about what we do. You walk up to someone and they say, "Hey, what's your name? What do you do?" There's a reason for that. As soon as you find out what the person does, you immediately put them on a continuum of value in your own perspective. Well, I work for the city. I pick up the garbage for everybody in the city. And there are people who would put that person now down here. Probably somebody still a little bit lower. I don't know who it would be, but, somebody. But, you're automatically down here. Oh, well, I'm a world-class brain surgeon. Or the difference between, say, a person the person who gets sent into the sewage system to break up the clogs, or the king. I had a fellow student when I was in high school. Her passion was Princess Diana. And so I can imagine that if you said you were royalty in any way, shape, or form, that put you at the top of the social scale for her. I was never all that impressed. I would have put princes and princesses, kings and queens somewhere in the middle, probably, mostly based on wealth. But what the Sabbath does is it forces us to say, wait a minute. It doesn't matter what you do, because what you do does not define you. I shouldn't define myself by what I do, and I shouldn't define others by what I do. God values us so much that no matter what we do for a living, we all deserve a time of rest. Partly because it's God's day. He has set it apart for himself. He's made it holy. It's meant to be a time to commune with God. But also because we're all of infinite intrinsic value. Not one of us is so low on the totem pole that God does not love us supremely and look at us as so far above, as so valuable that he was willing to send his own son Jesus to die for you, for me. Sabbath is about restoring the humanity and the worth to each and every person in the world. Maybe Sabbath's a little more important than we thought. It builds into our life a weekly reminder that God loves us, that God values us, that work is not what life is all about, that we matter. Somebody also observed, interestingly enough, that the fourth commandment protects the first two. No other God but God, and no graven images. If you observe Sabbath, you can't even let work become the consuming God of your life. Because you are commanded to interrupt your labors and say, wait a minute, there's something more important. God. And frankly, I'm more important than work. Work is a curse. The gift given to us by God is a time of Sabbath, a time to rest and commune with God and remember that we are valued, that we are loved. Now, that still doesn't address the question that lies underneath all this, and that is, but what is the Christian's relationship to the Ten Commandments? In other words, are Christians required to follow the Ten Commandments or not? And the answer, unfortunately, is yes and no. It's no, because the New Testament does point out that we're not to be judged. We're not to allow ourselves to be judged by things like new moons, Sabbaths, and other ritual practices, which I tend to think probably means how you practice religion is not the real issue, because that's not what saves. That's not what brings you into right relationship with God. But in the same New Testament, we're also told things like this. The commandment not to murder, the commandment not to steal or to covet or to commit adultery, and any other commandment is summed up in the statement, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. That means that, in this case, Paul, but that means the New Testament is affirming for us that the Ten Commandments are, in fact, valuable, if not required, for Christians. They don't get us into right relationship with God, but they have a value that goes beyond that. The way I would put it is this. The same God who gave the commands on Mount Sinai is also the God who gave us Jesus. And so when he commanded stuff on Mount Sinai, it's not like this was a different God saying something different. He was revealing to us what he values, what his character is about, who he is. That hasn't changed just because he sent us Jesus. He's still the God that says, I've given you this wonderful gift. This gift of Sabbath. And so while, maybe you shouldn't be a slave to it, if you will, it's still probably something of value. And let me explain it this way. Because it's about revealing who God is and what God's character is, it's part of all the tools that God has given us to lead us into his heart. Remember, we are still called to be holy as God is holy. And in fact, it is our unique privilege. It is a gift of grace that we should share in the very nature of God. 2 Peter. If we're to share in the very nature of God, Sabbath is one of those things that helps us to be shaped into that nature. It is one of those tools that will help us to learn to see one another as of infinite worth, to recognize that it's not about what you do or what you produce. It's about the fact that you are a beloved creature of God. So loved that he sent his only Son, that if you would believe in him, you would not perish but have everlasting life. Maybe the Sabbath is worth a second look. Amen?